Then, forgetting consequences and allowing the child in me to seize the moment, I swallowed a large coin-sized amount of the most powerful substance in the world. It didn't taste like much more than sand, except for a clean kind of aftertaste and an immediate feeling of strong hope. At first, I had wanted to use the power to get all my chores done and clean the house in a snap of a finger. I thought a pristine environment would help me be in a good state of mind for making miracles. Then I decided I should slow down and think, because the chores would give me something quiet to do while I thought. While I was cleaning, my little walking baby son spilled the sand back onto the floor and was pulling handfuls out of the bag. I carefully tried to put it all back in the bag, but I'm not sure he didn't eat some. So I put it up higher where it would be safe and continued to clean almost in a trance. It was like my body was on autopilot, washing dishes and cleaning floors and feeding farm animals and children, while my mind was entertaining possibilities. I imagined a secret lab the way I would when I was young. I imagined a fancy automatic hidden door that led to castle dungeon stairs or a slide as options into the lab, which was comfortably furnished and stocked like an apocalypse bunker with all of my favorite snacks and medicinal herbs. I looked up from the dish I was washing and found myself at a sink in the very underground lab I had fantasized, but it was better. I was thrilled as I walked around. It opened up into a courtyard that couldn't have possibly been inside the house, or even in the yard, or on the roof. I still don't know how to explain the courtyard, because where the tree canopy is less dense, you can see the sky and the sun. It is a rainforest with at least 4 lions and cubs and a pair of tigers with babies as well. There are elephants and tiny elephants that I had never seen before, ranging in sizes like dogs, from teacup size to elephant sized. The courtyard goes on for acres, and the wall is very solid and covered with vines. When I finally looked over it, I just saw our yard the same way I would looking from the rooftop, which I could also still get to from the outside, like I normally would have. The courtyard has alligators and anacondas and bears and moose and camels and elk and horses and zebras and rabbits the size of wolves that don't seem to get along with the kangaroos. There are buffalo and deer and even monkeys. It is paradise with a rocky river and all. Tropical birds sing beautifully, and all the animals make their sounds, and I wonder if my neighbors can hear the elephants trumpeting, but they never say so. And besides the courtyard and kitchen, the lab was equipped with technology I had never seen. I brought my 2 children to play in the state-of-the-art Kid Fun Center that was, of course, also in the lab. I sat down and watched them play while I gobble-pigged a few flats of chocolate-covered cherries. I considered what a blessing it would be to have Eden's medicine flower growing rampantly all over the world. I hoped it would grow as much as possible, covering buildings in every city and on street lamps and sidewalks and throughout deserts, and I imagined that cool protein grain grass growing in yards and fields and wherever it may be needed. I happily opened another flat of chocolate-covered cherries until I was so delighted by the familiar smell of the flower vine already crawling up around the windows, but politely not covering them. I hurried upstairs and looked. It was like it had snowed outside. The white flowers were growing big and small everywhere I looked. Overnight, hospitals, mental health clinics, big tobacco companies, junk food and fast food, and big pharma and other industries became obsolete. Rivers and lakes became clean while it grew on the edges. It even grew some in the ocean. The entire world was healed, even the most terrible injuries and diseases. And no one could starve because the smell and taste were irresistible. Just the smell would cure addictions, and eating it would cure blindness and unlock a gene that would quickly regrow limbs, and it can restore a lost mind and bald heads. In one day, in 1 hour, the world changed. Wars even stopped to marvel at the miracle cure springing up. That same day, I hoped that my husband, who had shot himself, would be resurrected and come home. I knew instantly that he was on his way. I could feel that it had worked. I was in such a good mood and not even stuffed from the cherries because the flour helped me digest. There are hardly words to describe the awe and gratitude and intense anticipation. I fixed my hair up big and long and wild and made my eyelashes dark and full. I straightened and whitened my teeth to perfection. And I kept eating the bouquet that had grown up by my front door that I had cut and rinsed and put in a bowl. Some taste like strawberries and sugar, but better, and those were my favorites. Then I noticed a sensation in my head that was deeply painful, unlike pain I had experienced. Even though I had just taken one, I really wanted to get back in the bath. I was shaking and moderately horrified as I realized large worms were trying to escape from my brain before they died. I could feel them moving, and thinking back, they may also have been evacuating elsewhere in my body, but I was focused on what I could feel in my head and somehow see in my mind's eye. Soon I was vomiting out various species of parasites, and I would later hear how this happened all over the world as a result of the manna flower, which is what it was being called, but it had other names as well. Over the years, people grew taller and much stronger as a result of incorporating it into their diet. It didn't take over the ecosystem from other plants, and it was great for the soil and helped everything grow. But to return to what happened that night, next, I wanted to see the other side of the veil, into the spirit world, and once I did and saw everything and spoke to my grandma, who had been dead for a long time, I wanted everyone to see and understand as well. So it happened. The sight was immediately too frightening for most people. Some people prayed, and God let them fall asleep briefly to cope and be given information about what to do about demons from the Holy Ghost, except this time, rather than the white shirt and khaki shorts, he wore a simple and elegant and clean white and purple suit that some described one way and others described another, with many different reports. I also saw him take a bag of sand out of his backpack and give it to a young boy who looked all alone. For those who didn't pray, many submitted to dark beings or became friends with them. They might have lost their minds, but the flower comforted them through the traumatic realization that although they had just cleansed their physical vessels of parasites, they found themselves living with hives, hordes, and overwhelming infestations of gruesome and terrifying and biting evil beings, as well as magnificent angels and helpers. Serpents flew and slithered and coiled and choked and weighed down like chains and spat venom and told lies. Dragons convinced and manipulated and encouraged pride and evil and greed. Goblins stole and embodied perversion and spread it like a sticky tar. Huge, hairy humanoid beasts warmongered and preyed on strong people. Trolls crushed villages and hearts of millions with exploitation, and they always served vampires and other human-eating monsters. Bysters froze hearts into lonely prisons. There were giant ants and wasps to nitpick and stir up fear and embed stinging hate, and drones reporting back to a pale and gray, mannish-looking president. There were awful and ingenious plotting spiders all around him, and squat, skinny-legged, plump-bodied, Cheshire cat-eyed, long, dirty, oily, patchy, thin hair with sharp teeth minions who sat daintily cross-legged and smiling an evil smile that seemed to say, "Here I am, happy to be seen." The president looked at me with an empty poker face, and I saw in my head him unleashing a pest on the world that I would learn are called warbobs. They attach onto the ears and face and head and elsewhere. if there are that many. They are like a tick or a bed bug on the soul. They suck out your soul and release a powerful poison of discouragement and lack, and who knows how long they've been plaguing us. Of all these creatures, most keep a distance from the angels, who also come in every shape and size, even spiders as well, who are creatively spinning goodness. Beings of lore can be seen acting as guardians and aides. There are unicorns and dragons and incredible flaming birds. I of course prayed for help because I saw all of these beings and more in the room I was in. For some reason, even though the angels surrounded me, I was almost covered in warbobs. I couldn't pull them off. Their heads and countless feet were dug in deep into my skin, and I couldn't get any kind of real grip on them. Spirit is an ultra-fine physical material, but slippery in some way. While I was asleep, a man came to my house and stole the sand. I could see it happening in my mind. And the Sandman told me not to worry, and the best thing I could do would be to let him take it. He tried to explain that there were beings who would eventually deserve great wrath and utter banishment, and they needed to be allowed to make the evil choices so that it would be justice to send them to outer darkness, where they would be not among us for eternity. They would go to a place worse than hell that is too terrible for me to describe right now. You would stop reading. I was learning these things and other things when I was woken up by my husband, who I hadn't seen in years since he died saving us from himself. I was pregnant, and he didn't want the infant to be subject to his seemingly uncontrollable violence. The reason it took a few days for me to ask for him to be resurrected is that I was afraid the rage from head injuries and a lifetime of being abused would still possess him. I felt that years of being in the spirit world, free from his pain and his body, might have solidified the change he had tried so hard to make. I was right. He was the good man I loved, and he was there with me, in body, alive again, immortal, and he never hurt us again. He looked like himself, but his tattoos were a lot different and looked alive. He had taken my hand to wake me up. I looked around the room and saw that apart from the warbobs covering me, and some were the size of baseballs, he had made all the spirits leave. And we had privacy, and we hugged and kissed and cried, and he told me what I needed to do to make them detach, and how he had been there with me more often than not, and how excited he was. He had already made breakfast for our kids, who were also sleeping from the veil being lifted. We had been together in the living room when it happened. He called our older boy's name, who sat up from the couch, and then ran to him hollering in delight and surprise. Breakfast was an emotional reunion, and my husband held his new baby that was already getting big for the first time. The food he made was incredible. I don't have words for it. There were crepes from the protein grain from Eden, and a whole banquet that was better than the food any royalty has ever eaten. He had arrived in a smart suit and then changed into his old clothes, which I had kept. I think he did that to help me feel less starstruck. We wanted to hear all of his wisdom and his stories about the spirit world and who he had met, and I was concerned about the sand being stolen. About that, he smiled and quoted scripture. All things have been done in the wisdom of him who knoweth all things.